Question 1. Stakeholder feedback indicates a potential gap in Turk Telecom's adherence to data privacy protocols when engaging with external analytics providers. Specifically, concerns have been raised about the handling of customer information. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Turk Telecom's regulatory obligations under Turkish data protection laws and internal policies? Option A. Anonymizing customer data using a basic method that removes names but retains other potentially identifying details, and then sharing it with third-party marketing firms for analysis. Option B. Sharing raw customer data with third-party marketing firms to allow for more detailed segmentation, assuming they have their own data protection measures in place. Option C. Relying on individual employee judgment to determine the level of data sensitivity and the appropriate sharing protocols with external partners, without a formal policy or oversight. Option D. Sharing anonymized customer data with third-party marketing firms, ensuring the anonymization process is robust and irreversible according to KVKK standards, and obtaining explicit consent where required for any further processing. The correct answer is D. Sharing anonymized customer data with third-party marketing firms, ensuring the anonymization process is robust and irreversible according to KVKK standards, and obtaining explicit consent where required for any further processing. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Turk Telekom employees regarding the handling of sensitive customer data. The challenge lies in balancing the company's operational needs with the stringent data privacy regulations mandated by Turkish law. Employees must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance, protect customer trust, and avoid significant legal and reputational repercussions. The pressure to meet business objectives can sometimes conflict with the strict requirements of data protection, making adherence to regulations paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to the Turk Telekom data privacy policy, which is designed to align with the Turkish Personal Data Protection Law, KVKK. This policy outlines the specific procedures for data anonymization, access controls, and consent management. By following these established internal protocols, which are themselves derived from legal mandates, Turk Telekom employees ensure that customer data is handled in a manner that is both legally compliant and ethically sound. This approach prioritizes the protection of personal data, respects customer privacy rights, and mitigates the risk of data breaches and associated penalties. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves sharing raw customer data with third-party marketing firms without explicit consent or anonymization fails to comply with the KVKK. This law requires a legal basis for processing personal data, and such sharing would likely lack this basis, leading to privacy violations. An approach that involves anonymizing data using a superficial method that still allows for re-identification of individuals is also problematic. KVKK emphasizes that anonymized data should be irreversibly stripped of personal identifiers. If re-identification is possible, the data is still considered personal data, and its handling would be subject to the same strict regulations, leading to non-compliance. An approach that involves relying solely on the discretion of individual employees to determine what constitutes sensitive information without clear guidelines or a defined policy is a significant regulatory failure. The KVKK requires organizations to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure data protection. This ad hoc method lacks the systematic controls necessary for compliance and increases the risk of unintentional data breaches or misuse. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Turk Telekom should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing relevant laws, like KVKK, and company policies, like the data privacy policy. 2. Seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments when unsure about data handling procedures. 3. Prioritizing data protection measures over immediate operational expediency when there is a conflict. 4. Documenting all data handling processes and decisions to demonstrate due diligence. Question 2. Strategic planning requires Turk Telekom to implement a new hiring process. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test regulatory framework? Option A. Relying on assumptions about common hiring regulations and proceeding with the new process without explicit verification against the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test specific requirements. Option B. Prioritizing adherence to the specific regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines outlined for the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test, ensuring all new hiring procedures are vetted against these requirements. Option C. Focusing on implementing the fastest possible hiring process to meet immediate staffing needs, with a secondary consideration for regulatory compliance. Option D. Adopting general telecommunications industry best practices for hiring, assuming they will align with the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test's jurisdiction. Correct answer is B. Prioritizing adherence to the specific regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines outlined for the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test, ensuring all new hiring procedures are vetted against these requirements. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Turk Telekom, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment. Ensuring compliance with the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specific to the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test jurisdiction is paramount. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these regulations can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of these requirements and implement strategies that are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test's specific regulatory framework. This means prioritizing compliance with all stipulated laws, guidelines, and internal policies governing hiring practices. This approach is right because it directly addresses the core requirement of the assessment, which is to demonstrate an understanding of and commitment to operating within the defined legal and regulatory boundaries. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of lawful and ethical employment practices mandated by the relevant authorities governing Turk Telekom's operations. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over regulatory adherence would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal obligations Turk Telekom has. Such an approach risks violating employment laws, data privacy regulations, and anti-discrimination statutes, leading to potential fines and legal challenges. Another incorrect approach that focuses on industry best practices without explicit reference to the Turk Telekom hiring assessment test's specific jurisdiction is also professionally flawed. While general best practices are valuable, they are insufficient if they do not align with the precise legal and regulatory landscape defined for this assessment. This can lead to noncompliance with local laws and regulations that may differ from broader industry standards. Finally, an approach that relies on assumptions about regulatory requirements without verification is highly risky. Assumptions can lead to unintentional violations. Professionals must actively seek out and confirm the specific regulatory framework applicable to Turk Telekom's hiring processes to ensure full compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all applicable regulatory documents, seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments when necessary, and prioritizing adherence to the letter and spirit of the law in all strategic planning and operational execution. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that a proposal for expanding Turk Telekom's fiber optic network in a new urban area has been fast-tracked by the engineering department, with a recommendation to proceed directly to vendor selection without a full review of potential environmental impact assessments and BTK, Bilgi Teknolojileri v. İletişim Kurumu, compliance checks for new infrastructure deployment. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the quality control team? Option A. Approve the proposal to expedite the network expansion, assuming that the engineering department has already considered all necessary regulatory requirements. Option B. Escalate the matter to senior management for a decision, without conducting an initial review of the proposal's compliance status. Option C. Immediately halt the vendor selection process and mandate a comprehensive review of the proposal against Turk Telekom's internal project management guidelines and all applicable BTK regulations concerning infrastructure deployment and environmental considerations. Option D. Advise the engineering department to proceed with vendor selection, but to address any potential regulatory issues that may arise during the implementation phase. The correct answer is C. Immediately halt the vendor selection process and mandate a comprehensive review of the proposal against Turk Telecom's internal project management guidelines and all applicable BTK regulations concerning infrastructure deployment and environmental considerations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with strict adherence to Turk Telecom's internal policies and relevant Turkish telecommunications regulations. The core challenge lies in ensuring that any proposed solution for network expansion not only meets technical requirements, but also complies with legal mandates regarding infrastructure deployment, data privacy, and service quality, all while maintaining the integrity of Turk Telecom's operations and reputation. Careful judgment is required to navigate potential conflicts between expediency and compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Turk Telecom's established procurement and project management guidelines, cross-referenced with the latest regulations from the Information and Communication Technologies Authority, BTK, of Turkey. This ensures that the proposed network expansion plan is evaluated against all applicable legal and internal policy requirements, including environmental impact assessments, right-of-way permits, and data security protocols. This systematic, compliance-first methodology is crucial for preventing legal repercussions, operational disruptions, and reputational damage, thereby safeguarding Turk Telecom's long-term interests. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over compliance risks significant regulatory penalties from BTK, potential legal challenges from affected parties, and internal disciplinary action. For instance, bypassing established approval processes for infrastructure deployment could violate local zoning laws and BTK regulations concerning the installation of telecommunications equipment. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on cost-effectiveness without considering regulatory implications, might lead to the selection of vendors or technologies that do not meet Turkish data privacy laws, e.g., KVKK or security standards, exposing Turk Telecom to data breaches and associated liabilities. Furthermore, ignoring established internal risk assessment procedures could result in overlooking critical operational vulnerabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulatory bodies and internal policies. This is followed by a comprehensive risk assessment that considers both operational and compliance aspects. Solutions should then be evaluated not only on technical merit and cost, but also on their adherence to all identified legal and policy requirements. A multidisciplinary review involving legal, compliance, and technical teams is essential to ensure all potential issues are addressed before implementation. Question 4. System analysis indicates that a Turk Telecom department manager has verbally requested access to a significant volume of customer call detail records, CDR, for a new internal marketing analysis project. The manager states the project is urgent and requires the data within the next 24 hours. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Turk Telecom employee responsible for managing these records, considering Turk Telecom's commitment to data privacy and compliance with Turkish data protection laws? Option A. Advise the manager to access the data directly from the system if they have the necessary permissions, as the employee is not authorized to deny access to a manager. Option B. Politely inform the manager that access to customer data requires a formal written request submitted through the designated internal portal, which will then be reviewed for compliance with Turk Telecom's data protection policies and Turkish law before any data is shared. Option C. Share the data with the manager after anonymizing the customer names but retaining other identifying details, assuming this level of anonymization is sufficient for internal analysis. Option D. Immediately provide the requested customer call detail records to the manager, as the request comes from a superior within the company. Correct answer is D. Immediately provide the requested customer call detail records to the manager, as the request comes from a superior within the company. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for a Turk Telecom employee regarding data privacy and compliance with Turkish regulations. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the company's operational needs with the stringent legal requirements for handling customer data. A careful judgment is required to ensure that any data access or sharing is conducted ethically and within the bounds of the law, specifically referencing Turkish data protection legislation. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to Turk Telecom's internal data access policies, which are designed to align with Turkish data protection laws. This means verifying the legitimacy of the request through established channels and ensuring that any data shared is anonymized or pseudonymized where possible, and only shared with authorized personnel for a clearly defined, lawful purpose. This upholds the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, fundamental to Turkish data protection regulations like Law No. 6698 on the protection of personal data, KVKK. An incorrect approach would be to grant immediate access to the requested customer data, based solely on the manager's verbal request. This fails to follow established internal procedures and bypasses necessary verification steps, potentially leading to unauthorized access and disclosure of personal data, which is a direct violation of KVKK principles. Another incorrect approach would be to share the data without proper anonymization or pseudonymization, exposing sensitive customer information and breaching confidentiality obligations. Finally, attempting to find a workaround or delaying the request without proper justification also demonstrates a lack of commitment to compliance and could lead to operational inefficiencies or even legal repercussions for Turk Telekom. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding the request and its purpose. 2. Consulting internal policies and relevant regulations, KVKK in this case. 3. Verifying the legitimacy of the request through official channels. 4. Implementing data protection measures, anonymization, pseudonymization as required. 5. Documenting all actions taken. If in doubt, seeking guidance from the legal or compliance department is crucial. Question 5. The audit findings indicate a significant discrepancy in subscriber data reported by Turk Telekom to the Information and Communication Technologies Authority, BTK, for the previous quarter. The discrepancy appears to stem from an issue in the data aggregation process. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation in compliance with Turk Telekom's regulatory obligations? Option A. Inform the BTK of a minor data anomaly and request an extension for reporting without providing details on the nature or extent of the discrepancy. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive investigation to identify the root cause of the data discrepancy in the aggregation process, document all findings, implement corrective actions, and revalidate the data before submitting any revised reports or proceeding with future submissions. Option C. Immediately correct the reported data to match internal records without investigating the root cause of the discrepancy and proceed with the next reporting cycle. Option D. Assume the internal records are correct and adjust the BTK report retroactively without consulting the legal or compliance departments, and then proceed with the current reporting cycle. The correct answer is C. Immediately correct the reported data to match internal records without investigating the root cause of the discrepancy and proceed with the next reporting cycle. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for internal efficiency and data integrity with the regulatory obligations of Turk Telekom concerning data protection and reporting. The auditor's findings necessitate a response that is not only technically sound, but also compliant with the specific legal and regulatory framework governing telecommunications and data handling in Turkey. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any corrective actions taken do not inadvertently violate privacy laws or create new compliance risks. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation into the root cause of the data discrepancy, followed by the implementation of corrective actions that are validated for effectiveness and adherence to Turk Telekom's internal policies and relevant Turkish regulations. This approach ensures accountability, transparency, and compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of data accuracy and integrity mandated by data protection laws and telecommunications regulations, which require companies to maintain reliable records and report accurate information to regulatory bodies. The systematic process of identification, correction, and validation demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and good corporate governance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate data correction without understanding the root cause risks recurring issues and may not address underlying systemic weaknesses. This failure to investigate the why behind the discrepancy can lead to continued noncompliance with data integrity requirements. Another incorrect approach, which involves making assumptions about the data without verification or consulting relevant internal stakeholders and legal counsel is ethically problematic and legally risky. It bypasses established compliance procedures and could result in actions that violate data privacy regulations or misrepresent information to regulatory authorities. A third incorrect approach, which involves delaying the response or attempting to conceal the discrepancy, is a direct violation of regulatory obligations for timely reporting and transparency, and can lead to severe penalties. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the regulatory landscape, identifying the precise nature of the issue, consulting with legal and compliance departments, developing a remediation plan that addresses root causes, and implementing and validating corrective actions. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound, safeguarding both the company and its stakeholders. Question 6. Process analysis reveals that Turk Telekom is exploring enhanced customer service analytics to identify service improvement opportunities. A proposed method involves sharing aggregated customer usage patterns with a third-party analytics firm. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Turk Telekom's regulatory obligations regarding customer data privacy? Option A. Share raw, anonymized customer usage data with a third-party analytics firm, assuming that aggregated data is inherently not personal data. Option B. Share raw, unanonymized customer usage data with a third-party analytics firm, relying on their internal data security protocols. Option C. Share anonymized customer usage data with a third-party analytics firm, ensuring all personally identifiable information is removed. Option D. Share raw, unanonymized customer usage data with a third-party analytics firm, but only after obtaining general consent from customers for data analysis. The correct answer is C. Share anonymized customer usage data with a third-party analytics firm, ensuring all personally identifiable information is removed. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge related to Turk Telekom's adherence to data privacy regulations, specifically concerning customer information handling. Core difficulty lies in balancing the operational need for data access with the strict legal and ethical obligations to protect customer privacy. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance without hindering legitimate business functions. The correct approach involves implementing robust data anonymization techniques before sharing data for analytical purposes. This method aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are fundamental to data protection laws. By anonymizing data, Turk Telekom can derive insights from customer behavior without exposing personally identifiable information, thereby mitigating the risk of privacy breaches and regulatory penalties. This approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible data stewardship and builds trust with customers. An incorrect approach would be to share raw, unanonymized customer data with third-party analytics providers. This directly violates data protection regulations by exposing sensitive personal information without explicit consent or a clear legal basis, leading to significant legal liabilities and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on internal access controls without implementing technical safeguards like anonymization. While access controls are important, they do not prevent the misuse or accidental disclosure of identifiable data once accessed, failing to meet the standard of robust data protection. Finally, assuming that anonymization is not required because the data is for internal analysis is a flawed assumption. Even internal analysis can pose risks if not conducted with privacy in mind, and regulatory frameworks often extend to internal data processing. Professionals should employ a risk-based approach to data handling. This involves identifying sensitive data, assessing potential privacy risks associated with its processing, and implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to mitigate those risks. When data is to be shared or used for analytical purposes, prioritizing anonymization or pseudonymization techniques, where feasible, should be the default. Regular training on data privacy regulations and best practices is also crucial for all personnel involved in data handling. Question 7. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of unauthorized access to customer data if Turk Telekom's marketing department continues to use raw subscriber information for predictive analytics without enhanced security measures. Considering the Turkish Personal Data Protection Law, KVKK, which of the following approaches best mitigates this risk while ensuring compliance? Option A. Implement robust access controls and encryption for the raw data, allowing the marketing department to continue using it for analytics. Option B. Pseudonymize the customer data, allowing for potential re-identification by authorized personnel if necessary for follow-up marketing campaigns. Option C. Develop internal Turk Telekom guidelines that permit the use of raw data for analytics, provided marketing staff undergo basic data handling training. Option D. Anonymize the customer data by irreversibly removing all personal identifiers before it is used for predictive analytics. The correct answer is A. Implement robust access controls and encryption for the raw data, allowing the marketing department to continue using it for analytics. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Turk Telecom employees to balance the need for efficient data processing with stringent data privacy regulations. The core challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Turkish Personal Data Protection Law, KVKK, to a practical business process, ensuring that customer data is handled ethically and legally. Careful judgment is required to avoid potential breaches and associated penalties. The correct approach involves implementing anonymization techniques that irreversibly remove or obscure personal identifiers before data is used for analytical purposes. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation enshrined in the KVKK. By anonymizing the data, Turk Telecom can leverage its insights for service improvement without compromising individual privacy, thereby adhering to Article 10 of the KVKK, which mandates transparency and informing data subjects about data processing, and Article 11, which grants data subjects rights regarding their data. An incorrect approach would be to use pseudonymized data without further safeguards. While pseudonymization reduces direct identifiability, it is still considered personal data under the KVKK if re-identification is possible, even indirectly. This could violate the principle of data minimization and potentially lead to unauthorized processing if the re-identification keys are compromised. Another incorrect approach would be to share raw, identifiable customer data with third-party analytics providers without explicit consent or a clear legal basis. This directly contravenes the KVKK requirements for lawful data processing, including obtaining consent, Article 5, or relying on other legitimate grounds, and the obligation to ensure adequate protection when transferring data abroad, Article 9. Finally, relying solely on internal policies that are less stringent than the KVKK would be a failure. While internal policies are important, they must be compliant with the overarching legal framework. Any internal guideline that permits processing of personal data in a manner inconsistent with the KVKK would be legally invalid and ethically unsound. The professional decision-making process should involve a thorough understanding of the KVKK provisions related to personal data processing, anonymization, and consent. When faced with such a scenario, professionals should consult with legal and compliance departments to ensure any proposed data processing method is fully compliant. They should prioritize methods that offer the highest level of data protection while still enabling the business objective, always erring on the side of caution when interpreting regulatory requirements. Question 8. Upon reviewing a proposal to share anonymized customer usage data with a third-party analytics firm to improve service offerings, what is the most compliant and ethically sound approach for a Turk Telecom employee to take, considering the Turkish Personal Data Protection Law, KVKK? Option A. Share the data after a brief internal discussion with the marketing department, as the potential business benefits outweigh the need for explicit customer consent for anonymized data. Option B. Proceed with sharing the data after ensuring it is anonymized, as anonymized data is not subject to KVKK. Option C. Share the data, assuming that anonymization is sufficient to bypass KVKK requirements and that general terms of service cover such data usage. Option D. Obtain explicit, informed consent from customers for the sharing of their anonymized data with the analytics firm for the stated purpose, and ensure the anonymization process is robust and irreversible. The correct answer is B. Proceed with sharing the data after ensuring it is anonymized, as anonymized data is not subject to KVKK. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for a Turk Telecom employee regarding data privacy and compliance with Turkish regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's operational needs with the stringent legal requirements for handling customer data. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data access or sharing strictly for legitimate business purposes and adheres to the principles of data minimization and consent, as mandated by Turkish data protection laws. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and application of the Turkish Personal Data Protection Law, KVKK. This approach prioritizes obtaining explicit consent from customers for any non-essential data processing or sharing, and ensuring that data access is limited to what is strictly necessary for the stated purpose. This aligns with KVKK principles of lawful processing, transparency, and purpose limitation, safeguarding customer privacy, and avoiding legal repercussions for Turk Telekom. An incorrect approach that involves sharing customer data without explicit consent or for purposes beyond what was initially communicated to the customer violates the core tenets of the KVKK. This failure to obtain proper consent and adhere to purpose limitation constitutes a significant regulatory breach. Another incorrect approach, which involves assuming consent based on general terms of service without specific opt-in for data sharing with third parties, also falls short of KVKK requirements. The law emphasizes clear, informed, and explicit consent for such activities. Finally, an approach that prioritizes business expediency over data protection principles by sharing data without proper due diligence or legal review exposes Turk Telekom to substantial legal and reputational risks. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant legal and ethical obligations. This involves consulting internal policies and relevant regulations, in this case, KVKK. Next, they should assess the specific data in question and the proposed use, considering the principles of necessity and proportionality. If there is any ambiguity or potential for non-compliance, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments is crucial. The decision should always err on the side of caution to protect customer privacy and ensure regulatory adherence. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a potential for non-compliance with data privacy regulations concerning customer call records at Turk Telekom. Which of the following represents the most professional and regulatory compliant approach to address this finding? Option A. Ignore the finding, assuming that existing general data protection policies are sufficient to cover all potential risks. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the identified risks by Turk Telekom's internal legal and compliance departments to assess the specific nature of the potential noncompliance and develop targeted mitigation strategies. Option C. Immediately implement a company-wide policy change to anonymize all customer call records, regardless of retention requirements or specific legal exemptions. Option D. Delegate the entire responsibility for addressing the finding to an external cybersecurity firm without internal legal or compliance team involvement. The correct answer is C. Immediately implement a company-wide policy change to anonymize all customer call records, regardless of retention requirements or specific legal exemptions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Turk Telekom, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment. The risk matrix highlights potential noncompliance issues, which can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The core of the challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. A nuanced understanding of the regulatory framework is crucial for making sound decisions that protect both the company and its stakeholders. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough review of the identified risks by the relevant internal compliance and legal departments. This ensures that any potential breaches are understood in the context of Turk Telekom's specific obligations under Turkish telecommunications law and related regulations. By engaging these specialized teams, Turk Telekom can leverage their expertise to accurately assess the severity of each risk, identify root causes, and develop targeted mitigation strategies that are compliant and effective. This systematic and expert-driven process is the most professional way to address regulatory concerns, as it prioritizes accuracy, compliance, and long-term risk management. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the risks as minor without proper investigation, assuming that existing general policies are sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the specific nature of the risks identified and the potential for nuanced regulatory interpretations. It also bypasses the necessary due diligence required by regulatory bodies and could lead to a false sense of security, leaving Turk Telekom vulnerable to actual noncompliance. Another incorrect approach is to immediately implement drastic, company-wide changes without a detailed risk assessment. While intended to be decisive, this can lead to unnecessary disruption, increased operational costs, and potentially introduce new, unforeseen compliance issues. It lacks the precision and targeted intervention that a proper analysis would provide, demonstrating a lack of professional judgment in addressing specific regulatory concerns. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire responsibility to an external consultant without adequate internal oversight or engagement from Turk Telekom's legal and compliance teams. While external expertise can be valuable, the ultimate responsibility for regulatory compliance rests with the company. This approach risks misinterpreting the specific context of Turk Telekom's operations within the Turkish regulatory landscape, and may not result in solutions that are fully integrated or sustainable for the organization. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, acknowledge and document all identified risks. Second, engage internal subject matter experts, legal, compliance, relevant operational departments for a thorough assessment. Third, consult relevant regulatory texts and guidelines specific to Turk Telekom's operating jurisdiction. Fourth, develop and implement targeted mitigation strategies based on the assessment. Fifth, establish ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms to ensure continued compliance and adapt to evolving regulations. Question 10. The control framework reveals that a Turk Telekom customer has reported a technical issue with their internet service. The customer has provided explicit consent for Turk Telekom technicians to access their account information and network logs solely for the purpose of troubleshooting and resolving the reported issue. During the troubleshooting process, a technician notices that the customer's usage patterns might indicate potential eligibility for a different, more cost-effective service plan. Which of the following actions best adheres to the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines for Turk Telekom? Option A. Accessing the customer's usage patterns solely for the purpose of troubleshooting the reported technical issue and documenting the resolution, without using the information for any other purpose. Option B. Accessing the customer's usage patterns to identify potential eligibility for a different service plan and sharing this information with a marketing partner to offer the customer a bundled service. Option C. Accessing the customer's usage patterns to identify potential eligibility for a different service plan and using this information for internal performance reviews to assess technician productivity. Option D. Accessing the customer's usage patterns to identify potential eligibility for a different service plan and proactively contacting the customer to offer the new plan, even though this was not the original purpose of consent. The correct answer is D. Accessing the customer's usage patterns to identify potential eligibility for a different service plan and proactively contacting the customer to offer the new plan, even though this was not the original purpose of consent. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Turk Telekom employees regarding the handling of sensitive customer data within the confines of Turkish data protection regulations. Core difficulty lies in balancing the operational need for data access with the stringent legal requirements for consent and purpose limitation. Employees must exercise careful judgment to avoid unauthorized data processing or disclosure, which could lead to significant legal penalties and reputational damage for Turk Telekom. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to the explicit consent obtained from the customer for the specific purpose of troubleshooting. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation as mandated by Turkish data protection laws, particularly Law No. 6698 on the protection of personal data, KVKK. By limiting data access and usage solely to the agreed-upon troubleshooting activity, Turk Telekom demonstrates its commitment to lawful and ethical data processing. This approach ensures that customer trust is maintained and regulatory compliance is upheld. An incorrect approach of accessing customer data for unrelated internal performance reviews violates the principle of purpose limitation. The KVKK requires that personal data be processed for specific, explicit, and legitimate purposes, and not be processed in a manner incompatible with these purposes. Accessing data for performance reviews, when consent was given only for troubleshooting, constitutes a breach of this principle. Another incorrect approach of sharing customer data with a third-party vendor without explicit consent for that specific sharing activity is a direct violation of consent requirements and data transfer regulations under KVKK. Consent must be informed and freely given for each distinct processing activity, including sharing with third parties. Finally, an incorrect approach of retaining customer data indefinitely after the troubleshooting is complete disregards the principle of data retention limitation. KVKK mandates that personal data be kept for the period required for the purposes for which they are processed. Indefinite retention without a valid legal basis or continued consent is non-compliant. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the scope of consent, the defined purpose of data processing, and the relevant legal obligations under KVKK. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments is crucial. This proactive approach ensures that data handling practices remain compliant and ethically sound, safeguarding both customer rights and the company's integrity. Question 11. Examination of the data shows that a Turk Telekom marketing team is proposing to use historical customer call detail records, CDR, for a new predictive analytics project aimed at identifying potential churn risks. The original purpose for collecting these CDRs was for network performance monitoring and billing. The marketing team believes analyzing these records will help them proactively offer retention incentives. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Turk Telekom's obligations under Turkish data protection regulations? Option A. Obtain explicit consent from affected customers for the use of their CDRs for churn prediction before commencing the analysis. Option B. Halt the proposed analysis and consult with Turk Telekom's legal and compliance department to determine the lawful basis for using CDRs for churn prediction, potentially requiring new consent or a revised data processing agreement. Option C. Access and analyze the CDRs for churn prediction, assuming that internal operational improvements are implicitly covered under the original data collection purposes. Option D. Proceed with the analysis of CDRs for churn prediction, as this is an internal business improvement initiative that benefits the company and its customers by reducing churn. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the analysis of CDRs for churn prediction, as this is an internal business improvement initiative that benefits the company and its customers by reducing churn. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Turk Telekom employee regarding data privacy and compliance with Turkish regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for internal operational efficiency with the strict legal obligations to protect customer data. Misinterpreting or disregarding these regulations can lead to severe penalties for Turk Telekom, including significant fines and reputational damage, as well as personal disciplinary action for the employee. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions align with the applicable legal framework. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation as mandated by Turkish data protection laws, specifically Law No. 6698 on the protection of personal data, KVKK. This means only accessing and processing customer data for the explicit, legitimate, and defined purposes for which it was collected. When a new, unapproved purpose arises, the proper procedure is to seek explicit consent from the data subject or to obtain internal authorization that confirms the new processing activity is legally permissible and aligns with Turk Telekom's data processing policies, which themselves must be compliant with KVKK. This ensures that customer privacy is respected and that Turk Telekom operates within the bounds of the law. An incorrect approach would be to access customer data for a purpose not originally intended or authorized, even if it seems beneficial for internal analysis. This directly violates the principle of purpose limitation under KVKK. Another incorrect approach is to assume that internal access for research or improvement automatically grants permission to use data in ways that were not originally communicated to the customer or for which consent was not obtained. This disregards the fundamental right to privacy and the legal requirements for lawful data processing. Failing to consult with the legal or compliance department before proceeding with a new data usage scenario is also a critical failure, as it bypasses the established channels for ensuring regulatory adherence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the specific data processing activity and its purpose. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and the applicable regulatory framework, KVKK in this case. 3. Assessing whether the proposed activity aligns with the original consent or legal basis for processing. 4. If there is any doubt, or if the purpose deviates from the original, seeking guidance from the legal or compliance department. 5. Prioritizing data minimization and purpose limitation in all data handling. Question 12. Assessment of the appropriate procedure for a Turk Telekom marketing team member to access and utilize customer contact information for a new promotional campaign, considering the Turkish Personal Data Protection Law, KVKK. Option A. Using customer contact information for the new campaign without any prior review of Turk Telekom's data handling policies or KVKK requirements, relying on the assumption that marketing activities are inherently permissible. Option B. Sharing the customer contact list with a third-party marketing agency without verifying the agency's data protection compliance or obtaining explicit customer consent for such sharing. Option C. Reviewing Turk Telekom's internal data privacy policies and the KVKK to confirm the lawful basis for processing customer contact information, potentially anonymizing data or segmenting the audience based on explicit consent or predefined legitimate interests before proceeding with campaign execution. Option D. Accessing the customer database directly and extracting all available contact details for the campaign, assuming consent is implied by the customer's existing relationship with Turk Telekom. Correct answer is D. Accessing the customer database directly and extracting all available contact details for the campaign, assuming consent is implied by the customer's existing relationship with Turk Telekom. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Turk Telekom employee regarding data privacy and compliance with Turkish regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's operational needs with the stringent legal requirements for handling customer data, particularly sensitive information. A careful judgment is required to ensure that any data access or sharing is strictly for legitimate business purposes and adheres to the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, as mandated by Turkish data protection laws. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Turk Telekom's internal data handling policies, which are designed to align with the Turkish Personal Data Protection Law, KVKK. This approach prioritizes obtaining explicit consent or establishing a clear legal basis for processing personal data, ensuring data is anonymized or pseudonymized where possible, and limiting access to only authorized personnel for specific, defined purposes. This aligns with the KVKK emphasis on lawful processing, transparency, and accountability, safeguarding customer privacy, and avoiding potential legal repercussions for Turk Telekom. An incorrect approach that involves sharing customer data without a clear legal basis or consent would violate the KVKK. This failure to obtain consent or establish a legitimate interest for processing constitutes a direct breach of Article 5 of the KVKK, which outlines the conditions for lawful processing of personal data. Another incorrect approach, such as retaining data beyond the necessary period or for purposes not originally communicated to the customer, would contravene the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, also stipulated in the KVKK. These actions not only expose Turk Telekom to significant fines and reputational damage, but also erode customer trust. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific data in question and the intended use. They must then consult Turk Telekom's data protection policies and relevant sections of the KVKK to determine the legal basis for processing. If a legal basis is unclear or absent, the default action should be to refrain from processing or sharing the data until clarification is obtained from the company's legal or data protection officer. This proactive, compliance-first mindset is crucial for ethical and legal data handling. Question 13. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Turk Telekom sales representative when a potential customer expresses interest in a new mobile plan, but the representative knows the plan has certain data throttling limitations after a specific usage threshold that are not immediately obvious from the marketing materials? Option A. Emphasize the plan's competitive pricing and superior network coverage, suggesting that the data throttling is a standard industry practice and not a significant drawback for most users. Option B. Highlight the plan's attractive introductory price and generous initial data allowance, mentioning the throttling only briefly and downplaying its significance to avoid deterring the customer. Option C. Fully disclose the data throttling limitations and explain their implications clearly to the customer, ensuring they understand the service's performance after the threshold is met, even if it means the sale might be less immediate. Option D. Focus on the benefits and features of the plan, assuming the customer will discover the data limitations through usage and can then contact customer service if they have concerns. The correct answer is C. Fully disclose the data throttling limitations and explain their implications clearly to the customer, ensuring they understand the service's performance after the threshold is met, even if it means the sale might be less immediate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Turk Telekom employee because it involves navigating a potential conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet sales targets can inadvertently lead to overlooking or downplaying crucial information that a customer needs to make an informed decision, which is a core principle of fair dealing and consumer protection under Turkish telecommunications regulations. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial interests with the ethical and legal obligation to provide accurate and complete information. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and customer understanding above immediate sales gains. This aligns with the principles of fair competition and consumer rights as enshrined in Turkish telecommunications law and Turk Telekom's own internal codes of conduct. Specifically, it emphasizes providing all necessary details about service limitations, contract terms, and potential additional costs. This proactive disclosure ensures the customer can make a well-informed choice, thereby preventing future disputes and upholding Turk Telekom's reputation for integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on closing the sale without fully disclosing all relevant terms, such as hidden fees or service limitations, violates the principles of good faith and fair dealing mandated by Turkish consumer protection laws. This can lead to customer dissatisfaction, complaints to regulatory bodies like the Information and Communication Technologies Authority, BTK, and potential penalties for Turk Telekom. Another incorrect approach that involves misleading the customer about the service's capabilities or benefits, even if unintentional, constitutes a breach of ethical conduct and can be construed as deceptive practice under relevant legislation. Finally, an approach that prioritizes meeting sales quotas over ensuring customer comprehension and satisfaction demonstrates a disregard for regulatory requirements and ethical responsibilities, potentially damaging both the individual's career and the company's standing. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable regulations and company policies. When faced with a situation where business objectives might conflict with these obligations, the professional should always err on the side of caution and prioritize compliance and ethical conduct. This involves actively seeking clarification if unsure, documenting all interactions and disclosures, and recognizing that long-term customer trust and regulatory adherence are more valuable than short-term sales figures. Question 14. Implementation of a cybersecurity incident response plan at Turk Telekom has revealed a significant data breach affecting a substantial number of customers. The internal communications team is advocating for a delay in public announcement to craft a carefully worded press release that emphasizes the company's robust security measures and minimizes perceived impact, while the legal and compliance departments are pushing for immediate disclosure as per regulatory requirements. Option A. Immediately disclose the data breach to the relevant regulatory authorities and the public, providing accurate and comprehensive details about the incident and its potential impact, in accordance with Turkish Capital Markets Board regulations. Option B. Inform only key institutional investors about the breach prior to the public announcement to allow them to make informed trading decisions. Option C. Delay the public announcement until a comprehensive and positive public relations statement can be prepared, focusing on the company's swift response and advanced security protocols to mitigate negative sentiment. Option D. Downplay the severity of the data breach in the initial public statement, highlighting only the steps being taken to address the issue without disclosing the full extent of affected customers or data types. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the data breach to the relevant regulatory authorities and the public, providing accurate and comprehensive details about the incident and its potential impact, in accordance with Turkish Capital Markets Board regulations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and without delay. Turk Telekom, as a publicly traded entity, is subject to regulations that mandate transparency and fair disclosure to investors and the public. The pressure to manage public relations can tempt individuals to delay or selectively release information, which can lead to market manipulation or misleading stakeholders. Careful judgment is required to balance business interests with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the cybersecurity incident to relevant regulatory bodies and the public, as mandated by Turkish Capital Markets Board, CMB, regulations and Turk Telekom's own corporate governance principles. This approach upholds the principle of timely disclosure of material information, preventing insider trading and ensuring that all market participants have access to the same information. By proactively informing stakeholders, Turk Telekom demonstrates accountability and builds trust, even in the face of a negative event. This aligns with the CMB's regulations on disclosure of material events, which require companies to announce any developments that could affect the value of their securities or investor decisions without delay. An incorrect approach of delaying disclosure to prepare a more favorable public statement would constitute a violation of CMB regulations regarding the timely disclosure of material events. This delay could be interpreted as an attempt to manipulate market sentiment or prevent investors from making informed decisions based on complete information. Such an action could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and legal repercussions for Turk Telekom and its management. Another incorrect approach of selectively disclosing information only to certain stakeholders would violate the principle of equal access to information, a cornerstone of fair markets. This selective disclosure could lead to accusations of insider trading and unfair advantage for those privy to the information, undermining market integrity. Finally, an incorrect approach of downplaying the severity of the incident in public statements, even if technically true, could be considered misleading if it omits crucial details that a reasonable investor would consider material. This lack of full transparency can erode investor confidence and lead to regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific disclosure obligations under the relevant jurisdiction's laws and regulations, in this case, Turkish CMB regulations. When faced with a potential material event, the immediate step should be to assess its materiality, consult with legal and compliance departments, and prepare for prompt and accurate disclosure. The focus should always be on transparency and fairness to all stakeholders, rather than managing public perception through delayed or incomplete information. Question 15. The efficiency study reveals that by streamlining customer support processes at Turk Telekom, significant cost reductions can be achieved. However, the proposed streamlining involves reducing the number of support agents and potentially limiting the scope of issues that can be handled by frontline staff, requiring more complex queries to be escalated. This could lead to longer wait times and a less personalized customer experience. Additionally, the study suggests leveraging aggregated, anonymized customer interaction data to identify patterns for further optimization, raising potential data privacy considerations. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Turk Telekom's ethical and regulatory obligations? Option A. Implement the proposed cost-saving measures immediately to maximize efficiency gains, as the primary goal of the study was to identify financial improvements. Option B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the proposed changes on customer service quality and data privacy, ensuring compliance with Turk Telekom's internal policies and Turkish data protection laws before any implementation. Option C. Focus solely on the cost reduction aspect of the study, deferring any considerations of customer experience or data privacy to a later, separate review, as these are secondary to the immediate financial objectives. Option D. Proceed with the cost-saving measures and the use of anonymized data, assuming that anonymized data poses no privacy risks and that customer satisfaction will naturally improve with more efficient operations. The correct answer is A. Implement the proposed cost-saving measures immediately to maximize efficiency gains, as the primary goal of the study was to identify financial improvements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's pursuit of efficiency and cost reduction with its ethical obligations and adherence to Turk Telekom's internal policies and relevant Turkish regulations concerning data privacy and fair competition. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or bend ethical guidelines. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of integrity or legal compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough, independent review of the proposed efficiency measures, focusing on their impact on customer service quality and adherence to Turk Telekom's established service level agreements, SLAs, and data handling protocols. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it prioritizes customer welfare and data security, which are paramount under Turkish telecommunications law and Turk Telekom's own corporate governance principles. It ensures that any changes are implemented transparently and with due consideration for the impact on end users, thereby upholding the company's reputation and trust. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement the cost-saving measures without a comprehensive assessment of their downstream effects. This could lead to a breach of customer trust if service quality deteriorates significantly, potentially violating consumer protection laws in Turkey. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize cost savings over data privacy concerns. Turk Telekom, like all telecommunications providers, is bound by strict data protection regulations in Turkey. Sharing customer data, even for efficiency analysis, without explicit consent or a clear legal basis would be a serious violation, leading to severe penalties and reputational damage. Furthermore, ignoring potential impacts on fair competition by leveraging internal efficiency gains in a way that disadvantages smaller competitors would also be ethically and legally problematic under Turkish competition law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory principles at play. This involves understanding the company's mission, values, and internal policies, as well as the relevant legal landscape. When faced with a conflict between efficiency goals and ethical considerations, the framework should prioritize compliance and ethical conduct. This means conducting a risk assessment, seeking clarification from legal and compliance departments, and ensuring that all stakeholders are informed and that decisions are documented. The ultimate goal is to achieve business objectives in a manner that is both sustainable and responsible. Question 16. During the evaluation of a new business intelligence initiative at Turk Telekom, a proposal emerges to analyze customer call detail records, CDR, to identify emerging usage patterns that could inform new service development. However, the proposed analysis would involve accessing and processing granular CDR data that, while not directly identifying individuals, could potentially be re-identified with further effort. And the current customer consent forms do not explicitly cover this type of secondary data analysis for service development. Option A. Immediately proceed with the analysis of the CDR data as proposed, assuming that the potential business benefits outweigh the minor risk of re-identification, as the primary purpose of CDR collection is for network management. Option B. Proceed with the analysis after anonymizing the CDR data to the highest possible standard and consulting with the Internal Data Protection Officer to ensure compliance with Turk Telekom's data privacy policies and relevant Turkish regulations. Option C. Initiate a broad customer communication campaign to obtain explicit consent for the secondary analysis of CDR data for service development purposes, even if it means a significant delay in the initiative. Option D. Inform the relevant business unit that the proposed analysis cannot be conducted due to potential privacy concerns and recommend exploring alternative, less sensitive data sources for service development. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the analysis after anonymizing the CDR data to the highest possible standard and consulting with the Internal Data Protection Officer to ensure compliance with Turk Telekom's data privacy policies and relevant Turkish regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a potential business opportunity and the ethical obligation to maintain data privacy and security, especially within the context of Turk Telekom's operations and the regulatory environment governing telecommunications in Turkey. The need to balance innovation and competitive advantage with strict adherence to data protection laws and customer trust, is paramount. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising Turk Telecom's integrity or legal standing. The correct approach involves prioritizing the established data privacy policies and regulatory compliance over the immediate, albeit potentially lucrative, data analysis. This aligns with the principles of data protection, such as purpose limitation and data minimization, which are fundamental in Turkish telecommunications law. By seeking explicit consent and anonymizing data where possible, Turk Telekom upholds its commitment to customer privacy and avoids potential legal repercussions, fines, and reputational damage. This proactive and compliant stance demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices and long-term sustainability. An approach that involves proceeding with the analysis without explicit consent from customers for this specific purpose fails to respect the principle of informed consent, a cornerstone of data privacy regulations. This could lead to significant legal penalties under Turkish data protection laws, such as the Law on the Protection of Personal Data, KVKK. Furthermore, such an action would erode customer trust, which is a critical asset for any telecommunications company like Turk Telekom, potentially leading to customer attrition and long-term damage to the brand's reputation. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay the decision indefinitely without any clear action plan, is also professionally unsound. While it avoids immediate breach, it stifles innovation and potentially allows competitors to gain an advantage. A responsible approach requires a proactive engagement with the ethical and legal considerations, seeking solutions that are compliant and beneficial. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the ethical and legal implications. Recognize potential conflicts with data privacy laws, company policies, and ethical standards. 2. Consult relevant stakeholders. Engage with legal counsel, compliance officers, and data protection experts to understand the regulatory landscape and potential risks. 3. Evaluate alternatives. Explore different ways to achieve the business objective while adhering to regulations, such as seeking consent, anonymizing data, or using aggregated, non-identifiable information. 4. Prioritize compliance and ethics. Ensure that any chosen path strictly adheres to all applicable laws and ethical guidelines. 5. Document the decision-making process. Maintain records of the analysis, consultations, and the final decision to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that a critical network component at Turk Telekom is experiencing intermittent performance degradation, impacting a segment of customers. While this issue is not yet severe enough to trigger automatic alerts for major outages, it is causing noticeable slowdowns and dropped connections for affected users. Your team is approaching the end of a performance reporting period, and addressing this issue proactively would likely result in a temporary dip in key performance indicators, KPI, for your department, potentially affecting your individual performance review. You have the option to either report the issue immediately and initiate troubleshooting, or to wait until the next reporting period to address it, by which time the issue might resolve itself or be less impactful on the current period's metrics. Option A. Inform your direct supervisor about the issue, but suggest waiting to address it until after the reporting period to avoid negatively impacting departmental KPIs. Option B. Delay reporting the service degradation until after the current performance reporting period concludes, hoping the issue resolves itself or its impact is minimized. Option C. Attempt to manually adjust network parameters to temporarily mask the performance degradation without fully investigating or reporting the root cause. Option D. Immediately report the service degradation through the designated internal channels, initiating a troubleshooting process to resolve the issue promptly and documenting the impact on KPIs. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the service degradation through the designated internal channels, initiating a troubleshooting process to resolve the issue promptly, and documenting the impact on KPIs. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential issues, but Turk Telekom, as a telecommunications provider, operates under strict regulations concerning data privacy, service quality, and fair competition. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not lead to long-term reputational damage or legal repercussions. The correct approach involves proactively addressing the identified service degradation issue by reporting it through the appropriate internal channels and initiating corrective actions, even if it means a temporary dip in reported performance metrics. This aligns with Turk Telecom's ethical duty to provide reliable services to its customers and adhere to regulatory standards that mandate service quality. By prioritizing transparency and problem-solving, the employee upholds professional integrity and demonstrates a commitment to customer satisfaction, which is a cornerstone of responsible business practice and regulatory expectation in the telecommunications sector. An incorrect approach of delaying the reporting or attempting to mask the issue would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This would violate Turk Telecom's implied commitment to service quality and potentially breach regulations that govern service-level agreements and customer protection. Such actions could lead to customer complaints, regulatory investigations, fines, and severe damage to Turk Telecom's reputation. Another incorrect approach of solely focusing on meeting the target without addressing the underlying cause of service degradation would also be problematic. While it might appear to satisfy immediate performance indicators, it fails to address the root problem, leading to continued customer dissatisfaction and potential future escalations. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a disregard for sustainable business operations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue and its potential impact. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and regulatory guidelines. 3. Escalating the issue through established internal reporting mechanisms. 4. Proposing and implementing solutions that address the root cause, even if they present short-term challenges. 5. Maintaining transparency with stakeholders throughout the process. Question 18. Performance analysis shows a significant dip in a key operational metric for a specific region within Turk Telecom, impacting the company's overall quarterly targets. While the immediate temptation might be to adjust reporting to present a more favorable picture or to implement drastic short-term cost-cutting measures, a deeper investigation is warranted. As a responsible employee, what is the most ethical and professionally sound course of action to address this situation? Option A. Focus solely on individual performance metrics within the region to identify scapegoats, rather than addressing the systemic performance issue. Option B. Temporarily adjust the reporting parameters to smooth out the dip and meet the quarterly targets, with a plan to address the underlying issues in the next quarter. Option C. Immediately report the performance discrepancy to senior management and relevant departments, initiating a formal review to understand the root cause and develop a sustainable solution. Option D. Implement immediate, across-the-board cost reductions in the affected region to offset the performance shortfall, without a detailed investigation into the cause. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the performance discrepancy to senior management and relevant departments, initiating a formal review to understand the root cause and develop a sustainable solution. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet performance targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken are not only effective in the short term, but also sustainable and compliant in the long term, upholding the integrity of Turk Telecom. The correct approach involves transparently reporting the identified performance discrepancies and proactively initiating a review process. This upholds professional integrity by adhering to Turk Telecom's internal reporting policies and any relevant regulatory guidelines concerning accurate financial reporting and operational transparency. It demonstrates a commitment to accountability and allows for informed decision-making based on accurate data, preventing potential future issues or misrepresentations. An incorrect approach of delaying the reporting or attempting to manage the data to meet targets would be a failure of professional responsibility. This could violate Turk Telecom's code of conduct and potentially breach regulatory requirements related to accurate financial disclosures and operational reporting. Such actions erode trust, can lead to more significant problems down the line, and may carry legal or reputational consequences. Another incorrect approach of solely focusing on immediate cost-cutting without understanding the root cause of the performance dip would be a superficial solution that fails to address the underlying issues and could negatively impact long-term operational efficiency and service quality, potentially violating service-level agreements or customer satisfaction mandates. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves understanding the company's policies, relevant laws, and ethical codes. When faced with performance issues, the process should include 1. Accurate data collection and verification. 2. Transparent and timely reporting of findings to appropriate stakeholders. 3. Collaborative problem solving to identify root causes. 4. Development and implementation of corrective actions. 5. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of the effectiveness of these actions. Question 19. Process analysis reveals a potential loophole in Turk Telecom's customer data management system that, if exploited, could temporarily inflate sales figures for a specific service by misattributing customer acquisitions. This loophole, while not directly illegal, could be used to meet short-term performance targets and earn a personal bonus. You are aware of this loophole and have the ability to utilize it. Option A. Discuss the loophole with colleagues to gauge their interest in collectively exploiting it, believing that shared knowledge mitigates individual risk. Option B. Ignore the loophole, assuming that if it is not discovered, it poses no immediate threat to your performance metrics or the company. Option C. Discreetly exploit the loophole to meet your performance targets and secure the associated bonus, as it is not explicitly forbidden by law. Option D. Report the loophole to the relevant internal department for investigation and remediation, and refrain from exploiting it for personal or team targets. The correct answer is D. Report the loophole to the relevant internal department for investigation and remediation, and refrain from exploiting it for personal or team targets. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can lead to compromising ethical standards, creating a conflict between personal gain and professional integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate this conflict without violating Turk Telecom's internal policies or relevant Turkish regulations concerning data privacy and fair competition. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to Turk Telecom's established ethical guidelines and data handling protocols. This means refraining from any action that could be construed as misleading or exploitative of customer data. Specifically, it requires understanding and respecting the boundaries set by Turk Telecom's privacy policy and any applicable Turkish laws, such as the Law on the Protection of Personal Data, KVKK. By choosing not to exploit the identified loophole, the employee upholds their professional responsibility to act with integrity and protect customer trust, which ultimately benefits Turk Telecom in the long run by preventing potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to exploit the loophole for personal gain or to meet targets. This action would be a direct violation of ethical principles and potentially the KVKK, which mandates strict rules for the processing and protection of personal data. Such a breach could lead to significant fines, legal action against Turk Telecom, and severe damage to its reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the loophole entirely without reporting it. While not actively exploiting it, this inaction allows a potential vulnerability to persist, which could be exploited by others, leading to similar negative consequences for Turk Telecom and its customers. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the ethical and regulatory implications of any potential action. Second, consult Turk Telecom's Code of Conduct, internal policies, and relevant legal frameworks like the KVKK. Third, consider the potential impact on all stakeholders, including customers, the company, and oneself. If there is any doubt, seeking guidance from a supervisor or the company's compliance department is crucial. The guiding principle should always be to act with integrity, transparency, and in full compliance with all applicable laws and company policies. Question 20. Process analysis reveals that Turk Telecom's IT security team has identified a significant cybersecurity breach impacting customer data. While the full extent of the breach is still being assessed, Initial findings suggest a substantial number of customer records may have been compromised. The company's public relations department is concerned about the potential negative impact on Turk Telecom's stock price and reputation if the news is released prematurely. They are advocating for a delay in the public announcement until a more comprehensive understanding of the breach and a robust remediation plan are in place. Considering the regulatory framework governing listed companies in Turkey, which of the following represents the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action for Turk Telekom? Option A. Disclose the incident only to major institutional investors and key business partners, providing them with advance notice to mitigate their potential exposure. Option B. Delay the public announcement until the full scope of the breach is determined and a comprehensive remediation plan is finalized to present a more controlled and less alarming message to stakeholders. Option C. Issue a general statement acknowledging potential system vulnerabilities without specifying the nature or extent of the cybersecurity breach to avoid causing undue alarm. Option D. Immediately disclose the material event to the Capital Markets Board, CMB, and the public, providing all known details about the cybersecurity breach and acknowledging that further investigation is ongoing. Correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the material event to the Capital Markets Board, CMB, and the public, providing all known details about the cybersecurity breach and acknowledging that further investigation is ongoing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and without delay. Turk Telekom, as a publicly listed entity, operates under strict regulatory frameworks designed to ensure market integrity and protect investors. The pressure to manage public relations can create a temptation to delay or selectively disclose information, which directly contravenes these regulatory principles. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical responsibilities. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the cybersecurity incident to the relevant regulatory bodies and the public, as mandated by Turkish Capital Markets Board, CMB regulations and Turk Telekom's own corporate governance principles. This approach upholds the principle of equal information access for all investors, prevents insider trading, and maintains market confidence. Specifically, the CMB's Communiqué on Material Events, Roman 2:15. 1. Requires listed companies to announce any developments that could affect the value of their securities or investors' decisions without delay. Prompt disclosure, even if negative, is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance and ethical business conduct. An incorrect approach would be to delay the announcement to gather more information or to downplay the severity of the incident. This failure to disclose material information promptly violates CMB regulations, specifically Article 15 of the Communiqué on Material Events, which mandates immediate notification. Such a delay can lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of investor trust, as it suggests an attempt to mislead the market. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the information only to select stakeholders, such as major institutional investors, while withholding it from the general public. This constitutes selective disclosure, a practice strictly prohibited by CMB regulations and a breach of the principle of fair disclosure. It creates an unfair advantage for certain investors and undermines the integrity of the market. A third incorrect approach would be to issue a vague or misleading statement that does not accurately reflect the scope or impact of the cybersecurity incident. This misrepresentation of material facts is a direct violation of CMB regulations concerning truthful and accurate reporting and can lead to severe legal consequences. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory framework, particularly the CMB's regulations on material events and disclosure. When a potential material event arises, the immediate steps should be to 1. Assess the materiality of the event based on its potential impact on Turk Telekom's financial performance, operations, or share price. 2. Consult with legal and compliance departments to ensure adherence to all disclosure obligations. 3. Prepare a clear, accurate, and timely announcement for the relevant regulatory bodies and the public. 4. Avoid any actions that could be construed as market manipulation or insider trading.